All right, and so our last speaker of the day is Bob Foreman. And Bob has been with us for a very long time, and as anyone who's taken any online courses know, Bob is one of our premier trainers. Bob and Richard Taylor usually will join us, and we've selected this talk from Bob, and it's the top 10 common ECL compiler runtime errors and how to correct them. We had a wonderful response from this, and we hope that you enjoy it and are able to get something from it again in this showing.
All right, well, we're going to segue right into the final presentation, and I have the honor of presenting this, our ECL tip of the month, top 10 common ECL compiler runtime errors and how to correct them. So, first poll question, which this is like poking the bear. What do you think about the ECL compiler messages? All right, so the answers are below on that screen, just your general opinion about ECL compiler messages, and we'll take a look at that result at the end of my presentation. All right, so when this tech tip came around this month, I was trying to think of a good topic, and just it came to me that after 7 years of training, we discovered that many errors that people see when learning ECL are common. So myself and Richard Taylor in our classroom environment, we get a lot of errors that are commonly occurring. So, we said, well, let's put these together into a list. Let's talk about the common errors that occur. All right, so a lot of these errors are easy fixes, but it's important to understand what the error message is saying and what in turn needs to be corrected. So we're going to take a look at that. Now, first of all, just a little background here about the types of errors. You can have two categories of errors. One is a compiler error. That's when you're doing a syntax check, and you'll see the error pop up before you submit the code as a work unit. The second type of error you'll get is an error that after you've compiled correctly and you're not getting any errors syntax-wise, when you submit the job to the cluster, these are runtime or system errors that will prevent a work unit from completing. And again, a lot of these are often easily corrected. All right, so without further ado, presenting the top 10 ECL compiler runtime system errors. And I want to thank, first of all, also Jim DeFabio, who's out there, Richard Taylor, to help me compile these errors. And let's talk about number 10. Number 10 is called the Workunit Assassin. Well, we had some chatter going around the groups where someone was getting this error and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So it was a system error for abort. All right, this was a runtime error, so they were submitting their job, and then at runtime they were getting this error returned. What was causing it? Well, somebody killed or aborted your work unit, simply. So again, on the cluster, someone saw your job. Maybe it was running too long. They wanted, maybe it was tying up the system. Maybe a lot of other work units were backed up, so they had the administrative rights to abort your work unit. So the fix to this one, of course, is find out who killed you and why, and then restart your work unit when everything is all clear. So that was our Thor abort. Number 10, the Workunit Assassin. Number 9, if you've ever been on Facebook and been unfriended, this is the Unfriended Node error. But this is the one that Flavio was asking about before we started our talk. Well, famously documented, MP link closed. All right, so first of all, what is MP anyway? Well, I thought, is it multi-link protocol? Is it the Minister of Parliament for those of you over in England? No. MP, according to our HPCC development team, is an abbreviation for message passing. So a message passing link was closed on a particular IP address, and the port, particular node, had a problem. So that's what's causing the problem, or that's the type of problem that you're seeing, is that one of the nodes just stopped responding. The causes, though, are a little more difficult, and this is why this is a hot topic, NP link close, because most of the time it could be an out-of-memory error. It might be a network issue, could even be one of the nodes going down. That's more of a rare occasion, hardware fault, or sometimes a version bug. Sometimes we get a new release and some code that you've been running for many, many months, all of a sudden NP link closed. It could be actually a bug in the version release. So the fix for this is, well, a couple of things. You can review your slave logs and your system logs configuration, check your configuration for C++ leaks, and if problems persist, if you get this NP link consistently, we'd like you to open an issue in the Jira issue tracking report. So that's number 9, which we call the unfriended node. Number 8, local limbo. All right, in class a lot of times people will bring in their laptops, and all of a sudden they come running up to me in a panic and they say, Bob, I'm getting this error, compile link failed, and all of a sudden their work unit number is showing the capital L in front of it, and then of course, the date and the time and everything else. Well, again, this is a compiler error. And very simply what happened was you lost connection with your cluster, and so by default, the ECL IDE reverts to a local target, which says, okay, your the actual cluster is on your local machine, and so it's trying to talk to the ECL CC and some other components in there and communicate. And so, of course, locally it can't find the linker, and that's why you're getting that particular error. So the fix for this one, of course, I tell people to go back, restart your ECL IDE, and then verify your cluster connection. So a lot of times what they're doing is they've got their laptop and they're connected to Wi-Fi, and so for some reason they might lose their Wi-Fi connection, which severs the connection with the cluster, and then all of a sudden their job reverts back to a local mode, which will then cause this compile link fail. All right, so here's some example of some code. You'll see this. You'll know this if you get this. First of all, try to change your target back to either Thor or Roxy or HThor. And if you can't change your target, that means you've lost connection with the cluster and you need to reboot. And again, the work unit itself with the letter L is indicative of a local target. Number 7, we had a tie in errors. These two errors are very closely related. Need to supply a value for the field, or the transform does not supply a value for the field. So one of the things I do like about the compiler is that the compiler sometimes will give you some really descriptive messages on how to fix your code. So not only does it give you a syntax error, but it says, you know, this is what you do that you need to fix the error. So let's talk about these. What do they mean? Well, again, these are both compiler errors, and the cause, the first error, need to supply a value for field, is normally in a table where your field is missing, or a field requires that you have in your table requires a default value. And the second error in the transform, where it's not supplying a value for self.fieldName, of course, that's, again, obvious. The target output of the transform has a field that you're not referencing. And I'm going to show you an example of that right now. So, of course, the fix to both of these is to get the default value for the table and make sure your field is referenced in the transform. Here's a couple of code examples. First of all, here's the table. And you see in the record structure, we have a field called rec ID. Now, sometimes people would create a table and they would just have the field only without the definition operator. And so then they'll get this error that says, need to supply a value for rec ID. And the person goes, well, I don't know what my rec ID is yet. I'm just creating a placeholder for it. So even 0 or a blank value for a string is considered to be a valid default value. And then that satisfies the table requirements. Moving on to transforms. Here's an example that we use in class where we've got a left record set from from a slim file. We have a right record set from a lookup city state zip, and then we have an output which is kind of rebuilding the record structure together. So in the output, which is this file person's layout, you've got fields that are not part of either one of the left and right of the join. So they have to be explicitly referenced inside the transform, like the marital status and the dependent count and so on. So sometimes, and again, my old friend Greg Whitaker, who is an ECL developer out there, he one time warned us about sometimes be careful about your shortcuts there at the bottom of the transform where you're doing a self is defined as right or a self is defined as left. What that does is cover all the other bases, all the other fields that you didn't explicitly reference inside the transform. Any matching fields from input to output will then get automatically just piped from the input of the join to the output of the transform. Number 6, divide and conquer. All right, what do we mean by that? Well, this is kind of a simple error. You'll get an error that says global dedupe with all is not supported. And some other statements like iterate and I think sort, and there's some other ones that have a global option that sometimes the compiler will give you an error on that. This error comes out at runtime, so the syntax will be, in most cases, will be correct. And then when you run this, you'll see this error pop up at runtime. Now, the cause of this is because the compiler detects that using a dedupe with all is a very processor-intensive operation, and so it is asking you to break down your data set into smaller groups to run more efficiently. So the simple fix to this, of course, no matter how small your data set is to group your target data set and then run the dedupe on the group reference. And that will then allow you to do a global dedupe with all. Now, global dedupe with all is normally used for small record sets like 10,000 records or less. In most cases, you're just going to use a normal dedupe for larger data sets. Number 5, data set hide and seek. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, this error is missing logical file. And every new ECL developer will sometimes have this problem. And they're just not understanding why they're getting this. And it happens at runtime. Syntax is correct in their code. They run this and they just are getting this missing logical file. And what does that mean? Well, again, the cause of this is that the file name you entered into the dataset declaration simply does not match the name of the file that you sprayed or output. So there's two ways that you can create a file in the cluster. Of course, you can use the ECL watch or the DFU to spray a file from the landing zone into the cluster, but then you can also use the output statement to output a file to the cluster. The fix for this, of course, is to find and correct your typo and make sure that the file that you spray, the name of the file matches the name of your dataset declaration. And a lot of times people forget the use of the tilde. So here's an example of that. You see, in this example, the person output with a tilde, and so that overrides the base folder of the cluster. So the base folder of the cluster normally would be Thor. So if you didn't use the tilde, the name of the file that would be on the cluster would be Thor : class : etc. And so the dataset statement below references the tilde. If you had not used the tilde in the output statement, then your data set would have Thor : class : and so on. So just, again, mind the tilde, make sure that you're using the proper use of the tilde, and that normally will correct this problem. Number 4, no data set to read. What is this one? All right, file.field name, no specified row for table file. I think a lot of you have seen this from time to time. It's a compiler error, and what causes it? Well, the code is trying to reference a field value from a single record when the only thing in scope is the entire data set, or a field may be out of scope when you're using a parent-child denormalized data set. So the fix for this, of course, is to modify the definition to retrieve a single record in scope. Here's an example of this. Here's some ECL that shows you the exact, this error was, actually went on our training cluster, was looking around at some errors. I found this, and I said, wow, perfect. I mean, one of our students that was using this came up with this error. So, and here's what happened. This is one of our lab exercises. They were trying to work with a Boolean definition, and then we were just trying to run the Boolean definition. And so the Boolean definition was saying, I don't know what value of trade type, you're running this right now. I don't know what trade type value to use here. And if you had corrected that, then it would eventually give you a report date, no specified row for that. So it's giving you the trade type error because that's the first field that it encounters. And that's what the compiler does. But really, the whole record needs to be retrieved properly. So that's the issue here. You can't run a Boolean definition because it simply doesn't know what value to test at that particular time. All right, number 3, we had a tie. And this is one of my important topics that we talk about in training. Dataset layout does not match published layout, and published record size for file does not match coded record size. I used to get a lot of emails from students who attended my class because I really didn't go over these as deep as I needed to, and the last few months going over this stuff, the emails have diminished, which is kind of, that's good to know. Well, a lot of times if the dataset layout does not match the published layout, people are just completely flustered about that. What's causing that? And again, these errors happen, they're system errors, so they will happen at runtime. They're system errors. The cause of this is, well, due to the compiler. In HPCC, the most important thing is the data. Not only are we fast, everybody, but we're also accurate. So accuracy is critical. And so if you output something using a record structure and then you try to define another record structure that doesn't match exactly, and there's 2 things we're going to look at here, then the compiler will give you one of these 2 errors. And the fix, of course, is to make sure that you've got the correct field name, position, or value type for the record structure that is referencing your data set. So here's an example. Here's some ECL code. You see on the left, we have the record structure that was used to output the record set. So we have a field called CSV_ID that's highlighted. There's also a field highlighted called zip code. The first error that you see on the top, dataset layout does not match published layout, would occur if on the right side you see that the developer didn't want to use the underscore in another record structure that was referencing the same data set. So they tried to change the field name thinking it was going to be a harmless change in the same position, it's the same type, it shouldn't be a problem. But no, that will be a problem. The compiler doesn't like to guess. The compiler needs to know exactly the field names that you output. If you want to change the field name to CSVID, then change it over on the left and then re-output, run the output again to the cluster, and then you can change the field name. So once again, it's just the information that's out there, the metadata out there that the compiler just doesn't like. The other error, of course, this one's simple. You can take the zip code field on the left was actually an unsigned 3, and the developer forgot, and he put a string 5 in there for the zip code. And this one's kind of really self-explanatory. It'll say published record size 31 for file, blah, blah, does not match the coded record size 29. So that size error is something that is a little more easy to decipher than the one in the top dataset layout. Also, if you change the position of the field, that's going to cause a dataset layout error as well. So be mindful. Be mindful. Now, the best solution for this is just have a common record structure for that's pointed to from all of your ECL codes. So if the person would have used the layout in that module on the right as the output basis, then there's no way that they could go wrong. So again, have a single source for your record. Don't copy and paste record structures around your repository, because then you can get into this dataset layout problem. All right, we're moving up to number 2. We have our action retraction. Okay, now this one's kind of easy, but a new user will sometimes see this and wonder what's going on. Definition contains actions after the export has been defined. One of the rules in ECL, as a compiler error, one of the rules in ECL is that you can't mix exported definitions with actions due to side effects that could possibly occur. So the fix for this is either, remove either the action from your ECL code or remove the export. All right, so we have some example code here. We have the someone here that was getting this error. They were trying to export a definition and then output that definition in the same ECL file. And of course, that just won't fly. So to fix this one, you would either comment out the output, or you could comment out the export and then run the output on export output. So a lot of times what I'll do, the trick, because ECL code avoids white spaces, you can just hit the enter key right after the export and then comment out the export itself to run a test, and then take the comment out again when you want to restore the export, and then comment out the action. So anyway, exports and outputs cannot coexist. And so a lot of times people also have a problem with multiple exports. And the rule is in a typical ECL file, you can have one exported definition per file. And someone says, well, what if I have multiple exports? What do I do? And the solution for that is the module. But then the module sometimes can give me my number 1 error, which I like to call module mayhem. And I'm calling this number 1 because everybody gets it in every single class that we have, and it's real simple. Here's the error. Module and the module name does not export an attribute main. And it's actually an error, but then it comes out as a warning, which then people are confused. They're like, am I getting a warning or am I getting an error? An error normally means it's something critical. A warning is something that, well, we're just going to warn you about this, but you can still run your code. But in this case, the code stops. You actually will get a runtime halt on your work unit. Of course, the cause of this, it's a runtime error. The cause of this is your module has multiple exports. You need to tell the compiler which one you want to run, or run a specific export inside of a builder window or another BWR file. All right, so the fix here is to use a builder window BWR file to explicitly drill down to your definition. And you can also rename one export definition as main, which is not recommended. So let me show you that. Here's a module right here that's got 2 exported definitions, def1 and def2. And so, of course, someone tries to hit the submit button up here to run it, and they're going to get the red X, and they're going to get this error that says does not export an attribute main. Now, if you had changed one of these to the word main, it would actually run, but that's not recommended because, of course, there's just other issues involved with that. You can open a BWR or a builder window and drill down to def1 by saying folder name.moduledemo.def1. Okay, and that would be the way to drill down to the particular exported definition. So there's our top 10. There was a couple that I want to call honorable mention because everyone always asks the question about these guys, and they're warnings. This one's kind of popular. Compiler server mismatch, and they get nervous about it. Is this going to cause a problem? Normally, if your cluster is a certain version and you've installed an update to the ECL IDE and you've got a more recent version, sometimes if it's a minor mismatch, it's not going to be, well, almost all the time, if it's a minor mismatch, you're not going to have a big problem. The one that you really should be mindful of is if it's a major mismatch, where you're using a version 5 cluster and you're trying to run the version 6 ECL IDE. So normally you should then think up. You should either have an IDE that is matching the server version of your cluster, or tell the system administrator to update the cluster to the most current version. So one of those two to get your cluster and your ECL IDE in sync. All right. that's one warning. The other warning we have here is another one. This one's kind of one of the popular ones. Everybody sees it when they're using the open source ECL IDE. They get this warning that says SOAP 1.1 fault, blah, 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 HPCC processing occurred, and they're wondering what's going on. After talking with Gordon Smith, he told me that this warning that appears is before open source, all clusters used shared repositories. So there was a check that we use when the ECL IDE connects to the cluster to see if the repository is a shared repository, one that's using a repository on the cluster side of things. Since everything is a local repository and our training clusters are local repository, when anyone ever starts up their ECL IDE with a cluster that does not use a shared repository, this warning will pop up. And again, to fix this warning can be safely ignored if you know you're using a local repository. So we're just about the end here. Here's a summary of the top 10 again. So this presentation will be made available if you want to summarize everything that we just talked about. And to conclude, many compiler errors are common to everyone and can be easily analyzed. As time goes on, your exposure to these errors will point to quick and easy solutions, and knowing what to do and where to go when you can't decipher a message is critical for your productivity. So I hope I've touched on some errors that you might have seen in your own ECL careers. That's my last poll question. Out of the top 10 messages just presented, how many have you personally experienced? How many errors have you seen like this? And just kind of curious about that, because we see them all the time in class. Some of you that are outside of the classroom may not have, I just want to know how many have you seen this, have seen these errors that we had on our list. All right, so let me go over to the poll questions first. Let's look at our first poll result. Yes, I figured. What do you think about the ECL compiler messages? I hope Gavin's not online because this would be very depressing for him, but only 14% said mostly descriptive, 42% said rarely descriptive, and the other 42% said that compiler messages were like an Indiana Jones puzzle. So, all right, so point taken. That's why we did this presentation. I wanted to maybe clear the air for some of these errors that you were seeing. And while the second poll is being tallied, let me just take a look at some questions from the audience. All right, let me see here. Let me go ahead and prioritize this. I love the funny descriptive names and classification of the errors. Have you written this in a blog or white paper that I can use as a reference? No, not yet, but certainly, that's something that would be easy to do. So I will mark that down on my to-do list. If I receive an error that I cannot troubleshoot, what are my options? Well, that's good. Well, first of all, you see my email right to the left here, robert.foreman@lexisnexusrisk.com. Email me, email Richard Taylor. In our training department, we are you're also a support resource for you. You can use the HPCC forum so that once you register on the HPCC systems portal, you can then post a question out there. Many people do that if they get an error they can't troubleshoot, and someone might have seen that error and might be able to help them through. Those are always your go-to. We're your go-to people. The forum is the go-to people, and then also the existing forum you can search, because sometimes you have an error that's already been answered. So as we want that forum to grow and grow and grow and be a definitive reference for many people. So that is probably your best bet there. And look, if we can't solve it, then I always say that I am surrounded by several the most intelligent people on the planet work for LexisNexis, and why we do such good things with our products. And so normally I can find someone who can find that problem and troubleshoot it for you. Is there a definitive list available for all possible compiler runtime errors? That would be helpful. I've asked, this question's been asked many times before. There is an internal list that's on, but it's not, no, it's not publicly documented, but if you dig down into the system, you could actually, like in the open source binaries, you can, there was a list, I think, that was put together, but it was like on the lower level. So the idea you have to ask yourself there is, why would you want to know every possible compiler runtime error, and what would benefit from that? I mean, ECL as a language most of the time is pretty good. I don't know. I mean, having a definitive list of every possible error, and a lot of times people want that list because they want to know, all right, now I got the error, how do I fix it? And the problem is sometimes you can have a boilerplate fix for one of the errors because there could be maybe 10 or 20 different possibilities that could have gotten you to that error in the first place. So that's where it becomes challenging. Sometimes an error can be caused by multiple reasons, and then you have to just say, okay, which one of these led me to this particular error? All right, let me just do one more here. The rest of these, how can I find out who aborted my work unit? I don't think you can unless, I don't know, maybe in the log files, maybe the system administrator, you can contact that person to find out who did it. That would be my first bet, would be to go to the administrator, and they would have a log there and might be able to track down who aborted it. All right. What errors are being reported that are specific to Git source code control? That's one I don't have an answer for. What errors are being reported that are specific to Git source code control? Okay, well, no, I mean, we're working with ECL, so not really sure about what we're asking there, but let me look at that offline. All right, one last poll question, which was, out of the top 10 messages just presented, how many have you personally experienced? Wow, 66% of you had 1 or 4 of those errors in the list. 33% of you had 5 to 9. Thankfully, nobody had all 10. And the other answer, 0, my coding is always perfect. So very good. Thank you for your honesty on that. And good. So you've seen these errors before. Hopefully, I've given you a little bit of insight as to what caused them and how to fix them. And thank you for replying to that poll. I appreciate it.